Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and we are reviewing the reviews for The Last of Us Part 1. This has sort of become a PlayStation only series because usually I'm able to get review codes for everything, but as I've said in the past, PlayStation has just completely walled me off, so it's out of my hands. I plan on playing this game and actually producing a review of it, because this one's a lot easier since I've played this game multiple times. It's one of the best games ever made in my opinion. The reason I wanted to dive into this is I thought it'd be fantastic to really dissect all of the reviews that are out there and parse between which ones are talking about it as a current release, not really reflecting that this is the third time it's come around, and those who are critical of it, and for those who are critical of it, what score they give it to reflect the quality of the game as well as the price point it's being sold for. For those who don't know, and I'm sure you've already heard, The Last of Us Part 1 is a bit of a ridiculous situation as of this moment in time. It's a game that's charging you $70 for a remake, and in a lot of ways, parts of the game are technically remade. Animations, lighting, etc., etc. This type of stuff is not easy, but in today's day and age, a remake usually defines something much different. You take a look at Final Fantasy VII versus Final Fantasy VII Remake, and both narratively as well as visually, gameplay-wise, it is a remake from the ground up, taking a new creative vision and applying it to an old property. That's typically what fits the definition of remake. Let's just be honest, The Last of Us Part 1 is not that, but it's a game that I really want to lay my hands on anyway to see what PlayStation is charging $70 for now. We need to be careful with this type of stuff. It is a dangerous road to walk down. Now, normally, as I said, I like to review these games, but if you're into this type of video on the rare occasion when it seems PlayStation releases a game, then consider subscribing. We just like to collect a lot of the major reviews out there, break them all down, save you some time in the meanwhile. So for those who haven't seen, The Last of Us Part 1 is sitting right now at an 89 on Metacritic. I thought that this was pretty good. It's also at an 88 over on OpenCritic. It is a little bit higher than I personally had expected. I thought that this was going to be one that may have been dragged down to the lower 80s, which again is not bad at all. I would certainly be thrilled with that. But for The Last of Us, for PlayStation, you know, the 90s are usually around where they sit, high 80s. That's been the place for their last couple of releases. Actually, all of them have sat around 88, 89, so they seem to have something pretty consistent here. I wanted to start off with GameSpot, because GameSpot sort of confronts the issue head on, and then afterwards gets into one of the major differences to them when it came to this game. They say there's an argument to be made that The Last of Us Part 1 is too similar to the PS3 and PS4 versions to be considered a remake, and part of me agrees with that sentiment. The story is identical, the level design is exactly the same, and the gameplay, apart from some quality of life improvements, is unchanged. On paper, if you played The Last of Us and remember it well, there's little reason to return to it on PlayStation 5. But The Last of Us Part 1 is more than the sum of its parts. It's an unrelenting tour de force that strategically leverages the power of the PlayStation 5 to push its story and themes a little further. Slight though many of them may be, all its enhancements serve the story, and the story is just as good as it was 9 years ago. So pause there. Even though they're admitting that the changes are very minute, they're saying it's something that helps push the game forward. What I found was fascinating while reading this review is how minor the things that they can reference are. They say the most obvious way The Last of Us Part 1 does this is with visuals. The overhauled lighting, sharp new textures, and smoother animations make The Last of Us a prettier game. But it's details in the faces and characters that make it a more meaningful one. I can feel the pain repressed in Joel, sense the pervasive hope in Marlene, and glimpse fleeting moments of innocence in Ellie. These details may not alter the way you think about these characters, but they certainly add more depth to them. Admittedly, they are also details that I've internalized through my multiple playthroughs, years of thinking about the game, and hours of consuming analysis of it. But the intricacies in the way characters are now depicted mean that for newcomers in particular, the nuances are more immediately perceptible. The writing and acting remain as strong as ever, and although none of the changes recontextualize characters or events, delicate retouches give them greater gravitas. To me, my interpretation here is we're kind of reaching right now. It is already a really well-acted game, one of the best-acted games I think that's ever existed. It's already as a presentation, cinematic video game. So my read of it here is like, if I could see an extra ring twinkle on Joel's face. He scowls a little bit harder. He's a little more angry. I don't know if that necessarily sells the moment more. To me, and this is where interpretation differs, what would sell a moment to me more is Joel's vocal performance. Of course, you want his face to match the emotion, but if he looks angry on the PS3, for example, and his voice is scathing, angry as he's getting aggressive, that conveys it a lot more than just how they look. To me, the idea that we're admitting that the differences here are minor, it's roughly the same game, albeit a smaller package, if you will, because the multiplayer won't be there. We know Factions will be a separate release, but we're going to give it an 8 out of 10, is an interesting position to be in. It's not an easy game to review, that's for sure, because it is certainly a game that is excellent. Again, as I said at the start of this, one of the best games I think ever made, but you have to look at the product as it is, not what it once was, in my personal opinion. The other thing that is talked about a lot with The Last of Us Part 1 is its changes in the AI. And so here is Ars Technica breaking that down. They say the remaster's newly updated combat AI, and it's funny, they're calling it a remaster at this point, is admittedly dampened by the game's opening tutorial-filled 90 minutes. You'll start this adventure sneaking up on dopey villains who stand still and stare in only one direction, all while nobody is nearby to check that they're okay. I will admit, the holy woe scripted moments in the E3 2012 trailer are not easy to replicate, but The Last of Us Part 1 gets a lot closer. Naughty Dog appears to have a brute force answer to the game's old AI problems. Simply pour more if-then conditions into these enemies' brains, then let the increased power of the PS5 juggle out all of the possibilities. If you kill a human, other baddies are now more likely to call out, wonder why their ally doesn't reply, and move toward his or her last known position with their guard up. When enemies know something is awry, they'll gesture towards the other flank, forcing players to react or scramble more quickly. And when Joel and Ellie truly get the slip on their foes by using a sneaky path, the bad guys realistically miss the memo and intelligently scatter to cover as much ground as possible. Infected zombie AI is actually understandably dumber. That fits the game's tone, and this game's infected fill sequences were built for simpler enemies and creepier conditions. Yet even here, The Last of Us Part 1 does a better job using sound cues and clearly visible enemy reactions to teach players how to move when they're pushing the limits of, say, being spotted from afar. Okay, this to me sounds like a bigger selling point. One of the most impressive parts of The Last of Us Part 2 was the AI, the way it maneuvered, called out, sought out where Ellie was, etc., etc. I love that stuff. It felt extremely immersive. It felt very real. To carry that backwards is an improvement. The problem here with this improvement for many players is it's almost not tangible. It's not a new weapon, a new mechanic, etc., etc. It's a thing that reacts to the way that you play. And oftentimes when it's well done, you don't realize it in the moment because you're so involved in the gameplay. So this does actively work against The Last of Us Part 1 in this manner. So I do like seeing a review that calls it out as it is, saying like, hey, they added a bunch of if-then conditions, and that is how it feels a little bit different. So I love the awareness in this one. That to me makes it more of a game that you could sell to someone. However, as I was paging through more and more reviews, things started to not add up. And the reason I say that is because we are seeing very positive reviews in some of these cases, very high scores, but at the end, their verdict doesn't really match that. And it's one of the rare moments I've seen that. And I think it's because, and I don't mean to sit out here and project my thoughts onto reviews too hard, but I do think there is a degree of fear of being that person who is the only one not recommending a certain game. We know how defensive of any console, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, these fans are of their respective exclusives. Look, it's even happened to me as someone who has a lot of Xbox coverage. When I come out and I say something along the lines of like Halo Infinite was just solid and everyone else was saying it was amazing for the most part, yeah, a lot of people came to me very displeased, very, very displeased. It's just the name of the game with reviews, and many people don't want to be that person, so they straddle the line, ride the fence a bit. And the reason I call that out is because, again, these reviews will say something very positive, but then you'll get to the end of something here like Metro's review, where they talk a bit about completely removing the multiplayer element, even though there's a standalone multiplayer experience coming next year. They say nothing's changed about the core game since we reviewed the game twice already. We'll be focusing primarily on the remake itself. You scroll down to the bottom when you look at their verdict here, and to me, their in short is fascinating for the 8 out of 10 score they gave it. A completely pointless remake of one of the best games of the last decade, except with only half the content and double the price. Now, for me, if I say that about any game, it is a wait for a sale, and I don't do number scores for this exact reason because it doesn't line up with the verdict. You can't call something completely pointless, worthless of existing practically, and give it an 8 out of a 10. If a game is unreasonably expensive, which, funny enough, that's what they say right here, unreasonably expensive, no multiplayer mode, no new content. The graphical changes are more impressive on a technical level than an artistic one and make little difference. 8 out of 10. Look, this is one of the best video games ever made, and so if you are a newcomer, I imagine this is one that you should pick up. But to call something completely pointless and then give it an 8 out of 10 and be like, yeah, you can go buy it, I don't know. I personally plan to review it as is, which is a $70 asking price for a game that's been sold twice. The PS3 version, which speaks for itself, the remaster, which also speaks for itself and felt like a catch-up. Why couldn't this have been, in Sony's world, a $10 next-gen upgrade versus a full-on $70 game? I think the reality is here, they're knowing people will buy this. And also, I think this is a bit of a focus test for PlayStation to see how far they can push things. Nintendo has historically pushed things very far. I think of Mario 3D All-Stars as such a lazy effort for a storied franchise, limited time release, creating artificial scarcity. What a weirdly handled game. We're seeing more and more skeletons come out of Nintendo in the terms of, even though it was one of my favorite games of last year, I gotta be real, Mario Golf was a great game, but it also was one that needed more meat on its bones. Mario Strikers this year, my God, my God, to say they sold a skeleton would be doing them a service. And I think what's happened here with PlayStation, because we've seen Nintendo sell these games for full price, even though they weren't ready to go, is with PlayStation, they're like, well, don't you love this thing? This thing that you're very close to, that you love dearly. Don't you want more of that? Pay up. And I think this is a test to see how far they can go. And we've seen PlayStation kind of see how far they can take it in multiple areas. I just talked about it recently with things like the price of their console in different regions, the $10 upgrades, the slightly more expensive month-to-month subscription service. They're seeing what they can get away with. The last review we're going to be looking at to kind of wrap this up is Games Radar. They gave it a 4 out of 5. They call it a breathtakingly beautiful game and that it offers a new perspective on a still powerful story. I imagine that's more personal interpretation based off what I read, but the bottom part is where I feel a lot of people would probably be sitting. It is one of the most polished and best looking missed opportunities of the current generation. And it's hardly an unappetizing prospect for PS5 owners, especially when the platform's exclusives remain frustratingly rare this far into the console's life cycle. Let's pour one out for Xbox fans right now. The question you have to ask yourself before picking up Part 1 then is not only whether a feast for the eyes is worth the meal paying for, but whether the meal is going to completely satisfy your appetite, particularly if you've already had your fill of the original recipe. So again, we have another, 4 out of 5, another high score for a game that they're saying like, yeah, it doesn't really quite answer the bell and it doesn't do enough. I just think it's funny how these review scores balance out. And to me, this is just an interesting social experiment on why review scores need to go and why I don't do them, because it completely contaminates the conversation around the game itself. But I get it because it's a quick selling point, right? When you see the Nibelian review roundups come out, it's like IGN 10 out of 10, GameSpot 10 out of 10, etc. You see like the quick scores, you're like, okay, worth checking into. Let's look a little bit deeper. That's where the number scores help, and just a quick gauge of like, do I want to check this out or not? But I think the conversation gets hurt so much. Anyway, that's reviewing the reviews for The Last of Us Part 1. It seems like a lot of people are on the same page that there aren't many additions to this game at all. And that's a damn shame, because I feel like with The Last of Us Part 2, there were already very little additions to the gameplay, and a lot of it was like technical pushes forward, so they just seem to retroactively bring that back to The Last of Us Part 1 now, when that could have been an easy next-gen upgrade, that could have been a free or paid update, I don't know. I just feel like to say that this was a $70 game and to give it the rave reviews it does only creates, I think, a dangerous precedent. But I want to, before I get really too authoritative with it, I want to lay my hands on the game. So you guys can look forward to that later this week. I'll be checking it out and probably putting my review out day of once I've put a couple of hours into the game just to see what it's all about, how it feels, because I haven't played The Last of Us since the remaster came out in 2014. We walked this road of what a remake can become, for better or for worse. And there are so many great examples out there, and there are fairly priced ones. I just played one and reviewed one, Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed, which is a remake from the ground up of the original PS2 game, but it's priced at $40, and it looks beautiful, it runs well, it does have some gameplay improvements, although minor ones at that. I look at where we're at in the remake scene, and it feels like Sony's out of touch. But I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts in the comments down below, so please do fire away. With that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I'll see all of you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.